Today, we become legends.
So with Hades literally being more than a decade old at this point, being one of the original 17 gods released with Smite's entry into closed beta in May 2012, I think he's more than overdue for a roasting from me. So without further ado, let's rant about Hades. So we'll start with the most obvious and cringe-inducing part of Hades, that of course being his 3 Devour cocks. Oh wait, that's Hades' mains. I think the ability is Devour Souls. Regardless, this ability has single-handedly won more solo lane laning phases than half the broken items in Smite's entire history combined. Not only does it obliterate your minion wave faster than Exodia, it also heals his own wave back to full. The exact amount it heals his wave by eludes me because there's literally never been a single time in my almost 4,000 hours in this game that his wave has not been straight up to full health after using Devour Souls. So not only does he insta-clear your wave, there's no point trying to clear his wave yourself because he'll just press 3 and refresh the entire wave, forcing you to lose gold to tower and or take damage holding the wave out of tower. But surely you can get aggressive on the Hades player and clear his wave before he can press 3. Nope, all you can achieve by trying to even contest this motherfucker's pressure is allowing him to blow you into the stratosphere with his insane damage that this ability does in a full wave, despite gods only taking half damage from detonations. Because each one still does 25 base and 25% magical scaling, meaning if you get caught in a full wave of friendly minions, you're taking 150 plus 150% scaling, in addition to the 235 plus 70% the ability already does, for a grand total of 385 base and 220% scaling. Obviously, the base damage isn't really a problem here, it's really the 220% of power, which is why the double stacking Hades meta recently actually worked. If you have 400 power from double stacking, this is going to hit for over 1000 on a basic ability in the laning phase with just 2 items. Seems fair and balanced. This ability on its own negates any chance of winning the lane against Hades. You can't fight him because he'll outdamage you, you can't poke him because he'll outsustain you, you can't clear a wave and play safe because he'll heal his own wave. All you can do against this early game is just sit there and take it until you can also one-shot the wave, which, trust me, is way later than when Hades can one-shot the wave, which is basically level 4 and onwards for that guy. Oh, and did I mention that this is all after the early game damage nerf this ability took in 9.11? Before that, it was even more ridiculous. But let's move on, because trust me, there is more to rant about with Hades than just his 3, even though it's definitely the worst offender. His ult though, this is another example of an ability that has been buffed far too many times. The same thing happened with Milan fairly recently and with Kuzenbo before that. Just because something is a bit weak doesn't mean you need to buff it in 15 different areas in consecutive patches. Buff it a little bit and wait and see. Hades' ult is a weird one because much like his 3, it can seem really weak in the right circumstances, but can seem absolutely broken in other circumstances, which leads to the duality of perception of Hades that allows him to go under the radar for long periods of time, which leads to Hi-Rez thinking he needs more buffs for people to play him, when in reality he's just very polarized, and then after a few buffs he explodes into the meta like he did recently. The ult is a perfect example of this. The full damage of this ability is absurd at 840 plus 240%, but it would be dishonest to portray that as the real damage value of the ability, despite the up to 30 flat penetration that this ability provides, or protection reduction actually, which is even better. Which brings me back to the volatility point. If you don't have jump, beads, or Aegis, this ability absolutely destroys you with its insane damage and protection reduction, but if you do have one of those things, it's very easy to avoid most of this damage. Another area that goes massively overlooked with this ability though is how absolutely nuts the defenses he gets are. For the entire duration, Hades gets 160 of both protections. That's the equivalent of 4 spirit robes that he's getting just for pressing his ultimate. Using the protections formula, you can see that a god with 30 protections, roughly what the average mage has at level 20, which by the way means Hades deals true damage to squishies using his ultimate, that would reduce the damage taken by around 23%. Hades ulting goes up to 190 protections, the initial 30 he has plus 160 from his ult. Can you guess how much this reduces damage by? Just over 65%. Yet, any damage you throw at Hades in his ult is only 35% effective, even if he's going full damage with his build. This makes bursting the Hades down to end the ult almost always a bad idea unless you have several people on him, which further polarizes the need for jump, beads, and Aegis. But I'm not done yet! Hades also gains 10% damage mitigation on top of the 160 of both prots during the ult, because apparently reducing damage you take by 65% as a full squishy wasn't enough. These apply multiplicatively, and so we can just multiply the 35% damage he would take by 0.9 to get 31%. Yeah, a full damage Hades only takes less than a third damage while ulting. I recently ranted on why in the 7 Hells chat gets 70% damage mitigation on his ult. Well, all things considered, Hades gets basically the same amount at 69% mitigated if you consider both protections and the 10% mitigations, but he also gets it for a full 4 times longer than Chak does while being a mage and not a warrior. How is this ever okay? Well, again, that comes back to the polarized nature of Hades. He can get away with this ult being ridiculously broken on paper because he's very easy to counter. But that just leads to even more frustration, since if you don't have one of the 3 direct hard counters to Pillar of Agony, you just eat shit and die. But on the flip side, if you do have one of the 3 hard counters to it, the Hades player eats shit and has no ultimate. This is basically the core of why I hate Hades, and it works the same way with his 3. There's absolutely nothing you can do early on in the laning phase to deal with Hades 3, but once you're out of the laning phase, it's an absolute garbage ability because it relies on minions to be good in teamfights. For half the game, you eat shit, for the other half, the Hades player eats shit. There's no point in the game where you can both be enjoying yourselves. Either you aren't having fun, or the Hades isn't having fun. I usually don't go into suggesting actual improvements in my rants, but I'd voiced this idea before in my videos, and I may as well talk about it in the rant as well to be a little bit more constructive rather than just bitching at the game like I usually do in these. I suggest adding phantom minions to Hades' kit that are similar to the ones created from Cerberus' 3. These could spawn from his 1, his 2, or both, probably both. These would chase enemies, dealing very minor damage, maybe even applying a small stacking slow, kind of like Chernobog ult does, but their main purpose is to create additional blighted targets for his 3 in teamfights, so it's not completely useless there. At that point, you can safely nerf the ridiculous damage and healing this ability does in the laning phase without completely destroying Hades in teamfights where he's already pretty weak. I would also just make it so Blight is built into his abilities and make his passive something more interesting. Perhaps these phantom minions could be that new passive. But hey, I'm just vomiting ideas at this point, so I'll end it here. What are your guys' thoughts on Hades nuts? Do you agree with me and think he's far too polarizing to ever be healthy for the game, or do you think it's fine to have characters that massively excel in some areas and are dog in others? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.